Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Welcome to a special edition of the Sport Business Podcast. We're coming at you live from the Royal College of Pathologists here in London, where we're bringing down the curtain on our SB Live event. I'm John Rest, Chief Correspondent of Sport Business. Joining me on the panel today, we have Martin Ross, Editor-in-Chief of Sport Business News. We have Maria Koledova and Joe Perry at the end. They're both Sport Business Media. And then our two Matthews, as we call them, Glenn Dinning and Williams of Sport Business Sponsorship. As you know, we've been off the record all day. We are going on the record now. Otherwise, it'll be a really boring podcast. So we will be talking candidly and freely. Thank you for the questions that we've been sent throughout the day. But obviously, as you all know, you already listened to the podcast. So you know that we like to start off with a little bit of a chat about what's been going on over the last week. And of course, we're focusing again on the World Cup. Martin was out there for a couple of weeks. He's just about willing to talk about it now. What have you been watching, Martin? What's floating your boat in the last week of the World Cup?
Yeah, thank you, John. Welcome. Different scene. Where better for a vibrant look at the sort of future of the sports, the life of the future of the sports industry than the Royal College of Pathologists? Seems very suitable. The future's looking good. Yeah, we were having a bit of a chit-chat in the office, I suppose, about hydration breaks. I know that we sort of mentioned this earlier. The in-stadium experience was kind of a bit different. Encourages you to listen to, be it Bon Jovi or others. Clearly, the Powerade branding is all over the place. Joe here at the end has identified as a big fan of hydration breaks. I myself am a big fan, mainly because as a Scotsman, it lets you now have double the opportunity to say, if we can just get through to the next break, we might be able to rearrange ourselves a bit and stay in with a chance. And then, as Joe pointed out earlier, having Living in a Prayer playing in the breaks was quite apt for the disastrous performance of my team.
But you needed hydration breaks after 10 minutes.
There was a lot of hydration breaks as well in the hospitality. You would see them just zooming up. In 4 minutes, you can go and get a lot of beers and come back. So it's working well there, but it is one that's splitting the room. Joe, why are you a fan?
Well, we did a show of hands earlier, didn't we? And I was not in as small a minority as I thought I'd be. Look, I'm not a massive fan. I don't want to see it in every football match ever. I don't want to see it in a nine-a-side on the park. But it has grown on me. I think broadcasters, we're talking about the UK here, it's different internationally. I think broadcasters in the UK have got better as the tournament's gone on and plugging the gaps. Obviously, there was the Emma Hayes incident that we probably don't need to go into, where the optics weren't so good for ITV. But actually, I quite like cutting away, bit of analysis, little bit of a break from Danny Murphy and
his cat.
And I think for me, maybe it's because I don't have anything riding on a lot of these matches. It's quite nice, bit of interruption, bit of colour. And with England in particular, worked out very well in the last game. If we're winning 2-0 and we're going to a hydration break and then we can see straight away, maybe I'll change my opinion. But actually, having been a complete sceptic at the start of the tournament, it's grown on me much more than I thought.
Excellent. That segment was brought to you by Powerade. And the news segment today, actually, which many people may not have seen, there was a leak in the French press, actually, in L'Equipe, which was a World Cup issue, which is a really kind of interesting one to the market at the moment, that specifically being ExpressVPN's sponsorship of the World Cup. Obviously, that role of VPN software providers, their emerging role in sponsoring sport is pretty controversial, given some, in many cases, are being accused in different courts, in France particularly, of enabling piracy. So I wanted to bring that one up. Javier Tebas, sworn enemy of Gianni Infantino, has written a letter to FIFA, as has APPS, which is the French anti-piracy organisation represented by all the broadcasters, and the LFP as well. Javier Tebas said it manifestly is incompatible with the principles of broadcast rights protection, and APPS said that they have grave concerns. They basically made the point that this ExpressVPN has been going through the French court at the moment, and they believe that effective measures are not being implemented there. This is one that we've written about. Frank Dunn's written a good piece at the end of last year. Maybe check out Sport Business Sponsorship for that. Did a really deep dive on it. It's one that will continue to affect the industry, I think, a small part, in terms of the segment. FIFA, for its part, says it's conducting its due diligence and it carefully examined sort of the potential implications, took steps to ensure that it doesn't undermine rights holders and stakeholders. Obviously, others will disagree with that. But yes, a live issue that just, as I say, broke this morning.
Okay, just talking about individual personalities of this World Cup, there's two that I keep seeing flash up on my screen, Gianni Infantino and Jessica Alba. They're at every game. But I want to talk about Brand Beckham very quickly before we go on to the question, Matthew, because he is everywhere at this World Cup, as you'd expect. But if I'm a brand and if I'm now trying, say in 6 months' time, someone says to me, which brand was Beckham advertising? I couldn't tell you because he's on everything. Is that a good thing for a brand or not?
Yeah, David Beckham has been everywhere. He's also been at Wimbledon. So,
Getting miles in.
First of all, he's representing about 3 different World Cup sponsors. When you see him on TV, he's not wearing a particular hat, right? So he's not wearing ABN hat or any of the others. So I think to cut to him, and by the way, I think the brands are requesting that he gets a nice seat from FIFA. FIFA just aren't asking him to be there, and it's just a bit of a coincidence. There's money changing hands, right? This is what I understand. But I think it's not a problem unless he is in the same market and promoting another sport. So if there's another sports event going on in the US and you see him there, then it starts to look utterly ridiculous. But as long as it's just with the World Cup and he's representing a few brands, I think the brands are okay with that. I think the brands would not be okay with him doing what I just said. If he was in another market, which he was with Wimbledon, that's less problematic. And also he was there for Stella Artois, effectively, which is AB InBev again. So it kind of works out, but as long as he doesn't do sort of double dibs in one market, I think he can distribute himself fairly thinly.
Okay.
That is at least what I was told by an agent.
There we are. Well, I'm sure we'll see more of him. I want to get onto the questions because you guys have taken your time to write them, so we should dedicate time to answer them. We've kind of read through them and divided them up slightly, but we'll try and make it a little bit ad hoc. The first question is, will the World Cup lead to football truly taking off in the US? I mean, if you look at we talked about the TV numbers earlier, right, Joe? 30 million, 42 million if you cover English and Spanish language for the last game. Huge numbers. But interestingly, I don't know if anyone saw this on the Fox coverage as the game finished, when they got tonked 4-1. The commentator said, please don't leave it another 4 years. This is a sport that's on all the time. So, they are obviously conscious that they are going to lose a load of fans. Now, we've written at length about the Apple TV deal with MLS, a 10-year deal. We're nearly midway through that now. Locking in a 10-year deal when you had this World Cup on the horizon doesn't look the greatest idea. In hindsight, there is an exit, we think, on that anyway, which I wouldn't be surprised if it's enacted, allowing Major League Soccer to go to market. We've seen the way that those rights have been opened up a lot more. You no longer need an MLS pass. It's just an Apple account or an Apple TV. So I think you're going to see some increases there. The big issue, I'm going to have to read my phone for this, apologies, because I came across these numbers, which I knew about the number. I didn't know how big they are. It's quite well written or reported that kids football in the US, I used to coach out there before I decided to get into the world of work, and it's expensive, right? People know it's expensive. I came across this. This is a team called Virginia Valor FC in the state of Virginia, under 9s football. I've got a 9-year-old that plays to a decent level in this country. It costs me about £20 a month. We pay him fees. You pay the FA, I think it's £100 registration and another £100 to the club. It's not costing me that much every year, and it's a good level. This is an under 9s team in Virginia. Okay. They pay $475 a month, July, August, September, October, November, December. Total $3,250. If you're late on any of those payments, it's $25. This is an under 9s football team. I mean, that is going to be the problem for them. The US sports system is all about dedicated to college, right? It's that pathway to college. Guys come out of college at 24, 25 and go and play pro in the NBA and the NFL. You're not doing that in soccer, right? 28 and you're old. So I think they've got a big issue there. I think this is their opportunity now. The legacy should be to make the sport cheaper for kids. The participation levels are still huge, despite what I've just said. It's, way more people are playing soccer than baseball, basketball.
Well, they play at high school and then, it's a big generalization, but then tend to stop and then master in something else.
Exactly, yeah. So I think it will take off. I think the fan base is there, the numbers are there. The structure of youth team sports still needs changing. So
anecdotally, and this goes slightly against your viewing figures, which outstripped the NBA finals by a good 10 million. But yeah. I was at a watch party in Boston. And Seaport was a very nice area of Boston by the water. And it was amazing. Screens everywhere, big screens, pop-up bars. The whole thing was just, it just put whatever the London ones.
Put it
to shame. It was just stunning, but nobody was watching. There was probably about 5% of the 500 people there who were actively watching the game. It wasn't maybe a crowd who'd turned up to watch the game, but yeah, that cut through still felt as if it's not quite there, but the figures are encouraging.
Yeah, the TV figures are encouraging, and as we touched on, they are going to go to market, we think, in this quarter, right, for 30 and 34. So who's going to pick up those rights? There's going to be a lot of money going around US soccer, whether it gets filtered down. We're going to move on. With the progression of women's sport and the increase of revenue, how long will it be before the sports industry stops bundling women and men? Perfect timing, Matthew, because you've done a piece on it.
Yeah, I want to thank whoever asked this question because...
I think it's got your handwriting.
Yeah, we published a feature about the ICC's decision to do just that today on Sport Business Sponsorship. So, I'll reference that, but if you want to read more, you know where to go. The ICC have actually already done it, and they're not alone. A few other rights holders have. But with the ICC, they decided to do it ahead of their 24 to 27 commercial cycle for both sponsorship and media. With media, they mandated that broadcasters bidding for rights would have to quote separately for the women's rights. And then in sponsorship, the ICC, it was an interview-based piece, and they told me they view it as a success. It yielded 2 global sponsors for them, Rexona and Google. Google have now actually expanded to a bidder deal that includes men's cricket, but, it's important to the ICC that women's cricket was the gateway for them, and Rexona's is women's only, and they're obviously owned by Unilever. The ICC are looking at it, whilst it's only 2 on the face of it, it's kind of quality over quantity. Those are exactly the type of companies they would want entering their sponsorship portfolio, and it's the decoupling of women's cricket that did that. And then if you look at the rationale as well, I think there's some very solid reasons to go down that path. Obviously, from a brand perspective, you want to offer them flexibility as a rights holder. So, why wouldn't you let them tailor their packages exactly how they would want? And increasingly, for a lot of brands, that is the women's game, whether it be cricket or another sport. The ICC actually said to me on the record that there was a time where sponsoring women's cricket was a sort of CSR play. It was something they felt they had to do for sort of optics. But their argument now is that that's changed, and it's a genuinely sort of sound commercial reasoning as to why you would do a women's cricket deal. Also, for the properties, it gives them a sense of where the value of their women's additional side of their sport is at as a standalone, rather than just as a piece of a bigger financial pie. An obvious benefit as well is that you can bring in new types of brands that wouldn't have been interested before. So I think Rexona would be a good example for the ICC. We also hear that they've, as mentioned in the piece, they've talked to other beauty brands, and that they're looking at, in the short to medium term, they think there's a sort of strong potential they'll do a fashion category deal for the first, which would be an ICC first. Okay. And that would be a standalone women's contract.
FIFA have been doing it for this World Cup. Well, the 2027 Women's World Cup has been marketed.
23 was unbundled, with the exception of US was one of the big exceptions.
Yeah.
So we are seeing it, right, in certain properties. I guess where it makes commercial sense to do so.
Yeah, so in the US, the Women's World Cup is unbundled for 2027 because before that had been included in that big Fox and Telemundo deal for Spanish language together with the men's. And FIFA went to market for the Women's World Cup standalone for 2027 and potentially had the option of 2031 on that tender. And that deal that we wrote about for Sport Business Media, I think last year, is massive. Like, however much you think that Netflix is paying for those rights, it's more. Probably like at least 5 times more. It's really impressive. They had a lot of interest from a lot of traditional broadcasters as well within the US. And then obviously Netflix came in for the US and for Canada rights for 2027 and 2031. And I think also it really depends on the market and the level of interest and kind of where a particular women's sport is in that market, because you also want to avoid either unbundling too early or kind of ending up in a sort of a public debacle of sorts, as what happened in Europe in 2023 for the Women's World Cup. I think there was a pretty public dispute with, FIFA arguing that the broadcasters were not bidding enough money, did not kind of value the Women's World Cup, in their words, as highly as it should be valued. Whereas the broadcasters were saying, well, okay, we're seeing the metrics. This is how much we think we should be paying for this. And so there is also a risk of kind of negative discussion that might be happening around the value of women's sports. So there's also a risk of trying to do it too early.
I mean, there's 2 things really. There's whether it makes sense to unbundle. Obviously, we're talking about women's sports at the high end of, we're talking about cricket or football or rugby, which is, World Rugby quite a few years ago, maybe 6-7 years ago, took the decision to sort of unbundle in certain markets. That made a lot of sense. The Women's World Cup to get exposure on BBC and the figures that they got off the back of that. Don't think they have a blanket policy to unbundle everything, but they do in certain markets where it makes sense. How much is the revenue growing is obviously a very live debate. I took the example of the Women's Champions League, which wasn't per se unbundled from the Men's Champions League. It was centralised and sold in its own, fully sold for the first time, really. It used to be kind of just match by match and the home team selling. that now, and the figure may surprise you as to where they are at the moment. But if I look at 24-25, which is, I think, the last of the previous cycle, so there's a new cycle that's come in, it has jumped up again. 19.3 million euros for commercial revenue for the UEFA Women's Champions League across media rights, sponsorship rights, a bit of ticketing, I think, for the final, and hospitality. That's up by 400,000 the previous year. As it stands, it still relies on a sort of 10 million cross-financing, underpin from the men's competition, so it can meet these costs and solidarity payments. So there is that live debate at the moment about just where every different sports discipline is among women's sports. It is going in the right direction. I mean, I think we should also caveat that by saying there is a new cycle, and Disney Plus has come in, and there's been a big success in jointly selling the Women's Champions League with UEFA women's national teams, which has led to increases as well. So I think the jump will be bigger if we look at sort of last season's figures when they come out. But the argument around how much women's sports revenues, I suppose, are growing depends on the sport, and also depends clearly on what revenue stream you're talking, be it ticketing, sponsorship.
Just to add to that really quickly, I think it really does depend on the sport, because I wanted to bring up tennis as an example of somewhere where women's tennis has obviously been kind of its own tour, its own property for a long time. And I mean, Grand Slams aside, I'm just talking ATP and WTA. There's a lot of markets where the WTA really, really thrives in comparison to the ATP. So, for example, if you think about Poland with Iga Świątek, or Czechia with a lot of their players who are doing really well on tour and at the Grand Slams, you know, there's not, especially with something like tennis, the interest from market to market really depends on how well a given player from that country is doing in the sport. And if they've maybe had a good run in a Grand Slam or whatever, kind of sometimes there's a bit of luck. It depends on when you go to market. But it really, really depends on kind of A, how it's been structured in the past, and if there's already kind of a history of it being its own thing that has its own value. And then B, how well those players are doing or how well that team is doing. And then also to add on the sponsorship side, I know that's not my circus necessarily, but I've been speaking to a lot of people in tennis, especially with the WTA, because, you know, they've said that they've had a lot of brands and potential sponsorship partners come to them and say, we want to do a women-focused deal. So I think PIF have a deal with the WTA. I think they sponsor their maternity leave, I believe, which is like a very obviously women's focused sponsorship deal. And so that again opens up a lot of opportunities.
And that's what's holding up a lot of the ATP WTA merger discussions as well, as to how much each side thinks respectively they're worth and the share distribution.
It's clearly not a one size fits all approach. And you say, look, market by market, sport by sport. I think we could probably be here for another half hour.
Questions get easier. They do get easier.
Yeah, and the answers get shorter, I think. MG, going to come to you. We have to do MW and MG, guys. Sorry, just to confuse everyone. What single metric of sports market intelligence should all federations or national governing bodies prioritise? And seeing as Adam from British Ice Skating's put his name on it, I will thank him.
Well, I thought I'd lead on my long experience in sports business. And we've got a Sport Business 30th anniversary tonight, of which I've been around for some of that. I'll put diplomatically. And if you'd asked me that at the start, it would have been about probably ticketing, ticket sales. That would be a metric, and an audience on terrestrial TV. I thought now, obviously, we're in this digital era, and it's clear that social media engagement figures are important and they're cost effective if you've done well. It doesn't cost a lot to put up a post. You get some rights, you get some video rights, you get interesting audiences. Our friend from Brand mentioned today, you can segment them, male, female, age groups, etc., across Instagram, YouTube. I think social media metrics are important, but more importantly, I think are data metrics. So if you've got details of who those people are on a database, you can upsell as a federation to those people. You can sell them new products, etc. But equally, if not more important, your commercial partners or sponsors can share in some of that data, obviously within regulation rules, and they can tailor-make campaigns. They can, if you know that someone's from a certain salary group, you can target certain products at them that you wouldn't bother with others. You could even, if you know where they live, you know that you've got a kind of car showroom near there that you can target. So I think, and there's some people in the industry who absolutely swear by this now. It's kind of their hobby horse. I think they're right to think that it's important. And so that would probably be my answer on the metrics. Just one thing I've kind of learned over the years, I'm sure it's not rocket science, but the company you keep is very important. That's not a metric point. But if you can get one really great sponsor early on, Rolex would be perfect. The rest will follow.
I would just throw, I suppose, one thing in from 20 years of writing about national governing bodies and their aim to, as they all do, to increase exposure. But the number of times I've sort of seen a national governing body throw money at a wall on OTT for such tiny numbers, it's difficult to make money on, and a service that often doesn't wash its face, maybe become preoccupied with serving the core fan if they've only got one, and maybe miss out on the bigger opportunity. I know that they're trying to do all of these things, but missing out on the bigger opportunity of understanding your place in the ecosystem and just, yes, produce a live feed, get it out on YouTube, 100%, get your product out there, but really divert the resource. In my opinion, I'm just a pesky journalist. I've never sold rights in my life, but divert your resources towards socials, build your product as much as you can in order to get that broadcast exposure on a, whether it's Red Button, whether it's whatever it may be, but some do seem to be just very laser focused on monetizing the core audience and maybe not seeing the bigger picture out with Olympics.
Absolutely. Big story we did this week, big story in not even just in Australia, in kind of global media, the NRL 5.3 billion Aussie dollar 7-year deal. Joe, I'm going to come to you mainly because with your facial hair and hair, you look like an NRL stroke NFL player. So apologies. And it's also right in your wheelhouse of media rights. Will this deal signal a decline for rugby union in Australia?
Interesting question. Yes, as you say, background is brand new deal, finally announced this week, 7 years. It's a 90% increase in cash terms. So huge deal, max of 5.3 Australian dollars. That's if this 20th team gets added to the NRL, which seems very likely. So yeah, huge. I think to answer that question, for quite a while now, perhaps always, rugby league has not been in competition with rugby union. Its big competition is the AFL, the Australian rules football property. And actually throughout this process, Peter V'landys, who's this big, brash, outspoken chair of the Australian Rugby League Commission, which has been managing the process, he's been targeting going past AFL. That's been his single objective throughout this whole thing. So that kind of tells you that NRL are looking that way rather than that way when it comes to rugby union. But what I would say is that money is obviously going to have to be found somewhere. And perhaps down the line, that's going to have implications for rugby union. But Rugby Australia got in ahead of this. They're locked in with 9 until 2030. And as we've reported, the interesting part about that deal is actually, depending on on-pitch success, Rugby Australia can increase, I think, by around a third the rights fee that they're going to receive. So when you look at it like that, I think you could say the ball is in Rugby Australia's court. If they play well, they will earn well. It's not quite that simple. If you think Wales are bad, Australia have also been on a pretty poor run for quite a long time now in international rugby. They're hosting the next World Cup, so perhaps a boost there. And obviously that would not just boost the rights fee, that would be much bigger for the sport. And also there's the domestic scene. Perhaps someone in this crowd can correct me, but I think 2014 off the top of my head was the last time that a domestic Australian team won Super Rugby when it was played among multiple nations. Those COVID years when it was just in Australia. But if they can improve on the pitch, obviously not easy, but that is their path out of this. And I think the NRL deal is sort of an irrelevance when it comes to that. It's in their hands. Play well, they will earn more.
We've got a couple more I want to rush through, so we're going to have to do quick answers, guys. This one is a brilliant question. I think it may even be from Mr. Rossi. Are your sponsorship or your media rights figures more accurate? We'll go Maria on media quickly. Yeah. 1 sentence answer. Who are you going for?
I can't speak for sponsorship, but I know that our number one priority is always making sure we're being as accurate as possible. And as Joe mentioned before, just trying to source from as many people as we can and stand everything up and think about why people are telling us what they're telling us.
Yep, same here.
You would be surprised to hear.
But I mean, the number of stories where we have to kind of not print it because we're only 95% there speaks to the fact that we have similar values.
Great question here from, you put your name on it, so I hope you don't mind me saying your name, Beth from LET Golf. We're going to do slightly the second part of the question later, so I'll just ask, depending on who wins the World Cup, or what is the value to that country of a team winning the World Cup, of what's left? Who do we think could benefit the most from winning the World Cup? I'll say Morocco. You know, they've done so well, but whether they'll beat France, but the idea of an African team finally winning a World Cup, they've got the next World Cup. There's a lot of money. Ben Cronin is over there. Ben and I we did a little tour in Morocco about 6 years ago, I think it was, Ben, when they were bidding with the US. We went to 3 or 4 different cities in Morocco. Not just the two of us, it was a press trip. A bit of a weird holiday. And I mean, the amount of money that the king is spending on development and training and education is incredible. And if they could win the tournament, I think that would probably be the country that would get the biggest impact from it. I don't know if anyone else.
I would pinch your answer. Yeah, I'd agree. The effect as well on the women's game, I think,
Yes.
could be big. They've not really made, to my mind, a huge impact at the Women's World Cup. Correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, that would be.
Would anyone, for ease of...
So it won't be Switzerland, that's all.
Switzerland?
No, it won't be.
No.
I think even if they won it wouldn't make that much difference to Switzerland. That's why.
The teams from a media rights perspective that FIFA could have done with doing well, probably Italy, Brazil, the US, albeit they did well to reach the stage they did. So I think
Italy just getting there would have been a success.
just getting there for Italy would be good.
Quick show of hands for this one. Not great for a podcast, is it? Show of hands. Will England win the World Cup? Show of hands
Oh,
for the
dear.
podcast.
yes.
Was
Just for yes.
I'm gonna push up to a dozen nicely. Martin?
As a bitter Scot, I'm not sure what to say to that. I would say they're the 3rd or 4th best team in the tournament, objectively. So if you're a betting man, which I am, you would probably have your money in France or Spain, but I'm beginning to sound like a pundit now.
Yep.
It's anybody's game at this stage, etc., etc. I think they'll beat Norway. I think Haaland will score. I think they'll get 2 or 3. They'll get a lot of goals in their team. I think they'll go out in extra time to Argentina in the semi-finals. But that may be conflicting what I believe and what secretly I hope. If I'm allowed to say
Secretly?
that.
Very finally,
Secretly.
for those who listen to our pod, we have the last section is kind of a bit of a bit more jovial, where we look at any other business and a look ahead. We are pushed for time. We're going to do a very quick any other business, not for everyone, but Matthew, you were trackside at Silverstone this
Yeah,
week.
fairly unique experience last Thursday at Silverstone. Attended a fashion show on the pit lane.
Did you get that suit there? Or?
Yeah, surprised you to hear I wasn't one of the models, but I was lucky enough to be amongst the 100 guests invited by M&S. It was their activation. They have a sponsorship deal with Silverstone, the venue, and yeah, they had a full-on catwalk on the pit lane. Aston Martin doing pit stop practice as it went on, so you had all the sights, sounds, and sort of atmosphere of Formula One, and all accounts it went down very well, and it is definitely a first for the world of motorsport.
Excellent. And just to look at obviously Wimbledon finals this week, but if you've got no football to watch tonight, there isn't any games, please do find some YouTube streaming. I assume it's UEFA Conference League first round qualifiers. We're already there. So the new season has started before the old season has ended. Guys, thank you everyone for coming along today. Listeners, as always, thank you. We will be back next week with a slightly more normal episode, and we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.